And then came Doom, the one that made parents nervous, teachers furious, and had kids huddled around beige desktop PCs in awe as demons exploded into bloody pixel chunks. Doom was the forbidden fruit of the early 1990s, and for a brief, shining moment, Atari, of all companies, had the best version you could play in your living room. Yes, Atari, the same folks who brought you E.T. on the 2600, suddenly had bragging rights over Sega, Nintendo, and even the mighty 3DO. Today, we're deep diving into the strange but fascinating story of Doom on the Atari Jaguar. In the end, this is so much more than just another port. It's a story about ambition, compromise, and raw determination. It represents a moment when Atari still swung for the fences, and when Jaguar owners could finally brag that their version of Doom wasn't a watered-down joke. John Carmack himself even stepped in and was coding like a mad scientist, wrestling with Atari's over-engineered beast of a console, pulling off miracles and making painful compromises along the way. Behind every shotgun blast and demon growl was a battle against the Jaguar's bizarre hardware, and the result is one of gaming's greatest comeback stories. Forget what you think you know about Doom ports. This is the untold tale of how Atari briefly stole the crown and how it all slipped away. So join me to totally geek out for a while in this retro gaming boss technical deep dive of Doom for the Atari Jaguar. As we begin our exploration, this video is divided into 3 parts. First, we'll discover why id Software decided to focus their development of console Doom ports principally to the Jaguar. In the second part, we'll review John Carmack's experience and views about developing on the system, including what he liked and what he couldn't stand about it. And finally, in part 3, we'll look at the programming wizardry used to squeeze the most out of the Jaguar hardware, resulting in what many consider to be the greatest home port of this game of its era. So to put things in perspective, we need to rewind back to the beginning, before Doom the Dark Ages was a thing, way back in 1993. id Software changed gaming forever with the original DOS version of Doom. It wasn't just a game, it was a cultural event. A pixelated horror show with demons, shotguns, and a major attitude. It ran on PCs, but here's the thing. Not everyone had a PC powerful enough to handle it. Doom needed horsepower, and in the early 90s, a gaming PC could set you back more than your entire rent. So naturally, console players were desperate for their own taste of Doom. Gaming magazines hyped it up. Playground rumors spread, and suddenly the question wasn't if Doom would hit consoles, it was when, and how good would it be? Sega jumped in first with a 32X version in late 1994. It beat Atari to the punch in terms of the release date, but here's the twist. The Jaguar version was actually finished first. In fact, it became the basis for nearly every other console port of Doom that followed at the time, including the 32X. And for good reason. Because John Carmack himself rolled up his sleeves and handled the Jaguar port personally. The man who invented the Doom engine was now wrangling with Atari's alien hardware to bring his gift to console players. Atari billed the Jaguar as the world's first 64-bit console, a huge claim at the time when Sega and Nintendo were still living in the 16-bit world, and when the PlayStation and Saturn were just peeking over the horizon. The Jaguar was supposed to be Atari's comeback, the system that would prove the company wasn't just a relic of the 2600 era. Jag Doom itself runs buttery smooth in full-screen mode with impressive lighting effects that closely replicate the quality of the original PC game. And playing this on the Jaguar was a real thrill to experience the true power of the system. It's hard to describe actually, but after having played tons of 2D 16-bit games before this, jumping into Doom on the Jaguar felt like stepping into the big leagues of gaming. And all of Atari's marketing hype somehow seemed to be more real. 64-bit power and all. The game even had 2-player deathmatch mode, and a co-op mode via the Jag Link accessory, which added even more good fun to the excellent single-player campaign. Doom was so popular in the 90s that companies actually banned it from the offices because employees were spending too much time in LAN deathmatches instead of, working. Doom was literally costing businesses money. But here's the catch. The Jaguar's architecture was kind of a nightmare. It wasn't just one chip, it was a Hydra-headed beast with 2 custom processors named Tom and Jerry, plus a Motorola 68000 CPU tacked on, like duct tape holding the whole contraption together, with a 64-bit bus and object processor to boot. And in theory, it was powerful. In practice, many developers couldn't figure out how to make it do anything without pulling their hair out. Atari knew they needed a killer app to prove this system was worth owning, and Doom was the obvious candidate. The company aggressively courted id Software, dangling money and technical promises, while Carmack was intrigued enough to give it a shot. But we'll come back to this in a minute in part 2. Here's where the horror story begins. The Jaguar's custom chips weren't just quirky, they were hungry. Each had strict memory requirements, and the console only had 2 megabytes of RAM to begin with. That's less memory than your smartphone wastes on a single meme. The developers quickly found themselves fighting obscure bugs, timing issues, and driver headaches that made debugging feel like playing Doom in real life. Every time they solved one problem, another imp popped up and ripped their face off. So compromises had to be made. The Jaguar version removed several enemies entirely. No spider mastermind or the cyber demon. What? And even the specters, the translucent versions of Pinky Demons, were omitted with the partial invisibility effect. This Jag port, along with most others based on it, do not truly contain a specter monster, since they are rendered identically to demons and are indistinguishable from them. And in-game music? Gone.
Game over, man. It's game over.
Replaced entirely by eerie ambient sound effects that made the game feel almost more like a survival horror slog than an action game. One of the things that I noticed when I popped the cartridge into my Jaguar was that the color palette was darker compared to what I was used to playing on the PC version. And if you want to hear about that experience, I made a whole other video about playing Doom on the PC back in the day that I've linked in the description below, so check it out and stick around for a while. But back to the Jaguar version. The use of its chroma-based 16-bit CRY color format is what caused the overall darker image due to its shading to black, compared to a RGB-based DOS version. Interestingly, the Jaguar's specialized hardware provides significantly smoother depth shading. But, for performance optimization reasons, the Jaguar port uses double-width pixels, effectively halving the horizontal resolution. This is especially noticeable on the first-person weapon sprites. The Cyber Demon wasn't just cut from the Jaguar version. He was famously missing from several console ports, which is wild because he's basically Doom's Darth Vader baddie. I mean, imagine Star Wars without Vader. Yeah, same energy here. And before I forget, I'd also like to invite you to subscribe to my YouTube channel, which is always here for a quick retro gaming break whenever you need it. I appreciate your support, since it's the only way YouTube will highlight my videos and help my channel to grow. Now, before we jump further into the rabbit hole about the technologies used to create Jaguar Doom, I want to put a bit of a disclaimer out there that some of the following details are anecdotal and based on the best and most credible information I could find online, from a variety of different sources, and primarily from various interviews with John Carmack himself. And while I wasn't part of the development team, I believe the following explanation does get most of the technical details right. But if you catch any oversights, then please let me know about them in the comments below. It's important to remember first that Carmack was also previously involved with the Wolfenstein 3D port, using the source code of the Super Nintendo game on a whim. He later converted it to run on the Jaguar. Atari Corporation approved the conversion for publication, and Carmack spent 3 weeks assisted by Dave Taylor improving the port's graphics and quality to what he later claimed was 4 times more detailed than the DOS version. He also removed the changes that Nintendo had stubbornly insisted on for the Super Nintendo port. As Doom was blowing up and becoming a phenomenon on the PC, Carmack knew he had to get Doom onto a console for it to reach an even wider audience, since many people couldn't afford a PC back then, let alone one good enough to run Doom competently, and the rest is history. So, in his mind, Jaguar was a $250 bare metal powerhouse that was the best platform available at the time to port Doom. It didn't require add-ons like Sega's 32X or Nintendo's Super FX chips, both of which were still inferior solutions. And it didn't cost $700 like the 3DO, which Carmack wasn't about to use its cell for the graphics anyway, due to his dislike of affine texture warping. The Jaguar really was the perfect sweet spot at the time for Doom, but sadly Atari never bothered with much of a software development kit, so only uber geniuses like Carmack could really make proper use of the hardware. Now, to better illustrate, let's look at his own words about this. The following are his direct quotes, so these are his words, not mine. Many developers are planning on waiting out the early 32-bit hardware wars, but I want to do a cool product even if it doesn't make tons of money. Sandy, our map designer, semi-derisively calls Doom Jaguar my reward for writing Doom PC. Good job. You can go play with your new toys. Our initial appraisal of the Jaguar was nice system, but Atari probably can't make it a success. But when I got to the technical documentation, I was very impressed. This is the system I want to see become a standard platform. I was slated to do a cut-down version of Doom for the Super Nintendo using the Super FX chip, but I keep thinking about how cool a Jaguar version for Doom would be, and Nintendo kept rejecting Wolfenstein for BS reasons like a Golden Cross bonus item that might offend Christians, right? We finally decided that we didn't want to be part of the chicken and the egg problem of new systems not attracting customers because developers haven't written for the platform because there's no customers. The Jag is cool. I think it has a shot at success, and I'm going to put my time where my mouth is. Why the Jag is cooler than the 3DO from my point of view, it only costs $250. The bulk of its processing power is user programmable. The 3DO has a capable main processor, a couple times better than the weak 68,000 CPU in the Jag, but most of the 3DO's power is in custom hardware that has narrow functionality for affine transformation. The Jag has some stupid hardware for Z-buffering and Garot shading, but I can just ignore it and tell the two 27 MHz RISC chips to do exactly what I want. A 64-bit bus with multiple independent processors may not be the easiest thing to optimize for, but there is a lot of potential. Now, here's where John Carmack truly earned his reputation as a wizard. As he mentioned, there were some unnecessary bottlenecks in the Jaguar's design which, if corrected, would have sped up performance considerably. Carmack's prescription? Atari should have replaced the 68,000 CPU with a third 32-bit RISC processor, add a dynamic cache to it, and give the Blitzer chip at least a small buffer. He claimed that with these changes, the Jaguar would not have matched the performance of the Sega Saturn, but would have been competitive even against the PlayStation. Between his involvement with development of the Jag ports of Wolfenstein 3D and Doom, he initially had mostly praise for its hardware. Reportedly, at one point even, he tried to get a stripped-down version of Quake running on it for a while, though given what a technical marvel even the Sega Saturn version of Quake is, it's difficult to imagine how it could have compared on the Jaguar. However, his attitude changed as the projects chugged along. After completing Jag Doom, months of struggling to work around poorly thought-out aspects of the system's architecture seems to have soured him to it somewhat. Again, looking at his own words, not mine. The Jaguar was definitely significantly hampered by its technical flaws, which kept me from ever being too big of a Jaguar booster. I was proud of my work on Wolf and Doom, more so than just about any of the other console work id had been involved in, but in the end, the better consoles won the war. The little RISC engines were decent processors, and I was surprised that they didn't use off-the-shelf designs, but they basically worked okay. They had some design hazards, write after write, that didn't get fixed, but the only thing truly wrong with them was that they had scratchpad memory instead of caches, and couldn't execute code from main memory, so I had to chunk the Doom renderer into 9 sequentially loaded overlays to get it working, and with hindsight, I would have done it differently in about 3. So it's a shame he didn't continue working with it, and in my mind, a huge missed opportunity by Atari due to their haphazard hardware design. You can thank the Tramiels for it being underpowered. The chips were not complete and had bugs. The designers, who weren't experts in silicon design, missed some fundamentals. Just one more register and it could have run without stalling all the time. If they had fixed this, the Jag truly could have given the PlayStation a run for its money. And skilled programmer Steven Scavone, not associated with Jag Doom, offered another point of view and elaborated on the keys to programming games on the Jaguar, explaining in layman's terms that it should be coded in as much assembler as possible. This machine flies when fueled by assembler. The risks in proper concert with the 68000 will do some absolutely amazing graphics. The Jaguar could utterly crush any 2D system. It's a lot easier to program 2D for than the PlayStation or Nintendo 64. So all of that considered, instead of relying on the Jaguar's Motorola 68000, the same humble 16-bit CPU used in the Sega Genesis, Carmack bypassed it almost completely. He pushed Doom's guts directly into the 32-bit TOM graphics processor and its Blitzer chip, milking raw performance out of the hardware that most developers couldn't even wrangle. He further reworked Doom's math to use fixed-point arithmetic instead of floating point. That might sound small, but on the Jaguar, it was a massive enhancement. Suddenly, the walls and floors could be calculated faster with less processing overhead, and the game's frame rate jumped as a result. The level renderer also got put on a diet. On the PC, Doom relied on hefty binary space partitioning trees to keep levels running fast. And on the Jaguar, Carmack slimmed that system down, simplifying the math so the console didn't choke on any memory calls. Some, but not all of the animated textures were chopped, not just for memory savings, but to reduce processor stalls. Sprite details were trimmed a bit too. And while these losses stung a bit in the overall presentation compared to the PC version, it freed up the bandwidth needed to keep the action smooth. Even the audio was an optimization in disguise. No MIDI soundtracks were used during gameplay here, just ambient sound effects. It wasn't just atmospheric, it was practical. Music drivers would have eaten up cycles that the Jaguar simply couldn't spare. There were ports of the original PC music that played between the levels, which gave the players a flavor. While I've seen some debate online about the music being excluded due to budget reasons, that doesn't make any sense at all, since the music does play between the levels. I've read in a few places as well that the Jaguar's Jerry DSP chip was also employed to help with some math processing during gameplay, which would have made it impossible for it to process the music simultaneously. But maybe the most impressive trick was Carmack's multi-processor juggling act. The Jaguar was infamous for having several chips that didn't like to play nicely. Carmack basically became an orchestra conductor. While one chip drew walls, another scaled sprites, while another handled clearing registers. He staggered their different workloads in a precise and coordinated sequence, so the machine was always doing something useful instead of idling. And the end result was a Doom that ran full screen, fast and smoother than anything the 32X, Super Nintendo, or 3DO could dream of. Carmack himself later admitted Jaguar development was both fun and frustrating. Fun because he loved squeezing power out of strange hardware. Frustrating because Atari's development kits were disorganized and incomplete at best, non-existent at worst. Doom on the Jaguar was actually used as the basis for several other console ports, including the 32X and even the PlayStation version. So in a way, every time you enjoyed Doom on your PlayStation, you were playing what was first built upon the Jaguar's shoulders. Now behind the scenes, it wasn't just Carmack. A small team of programmers and artists from id and Atari poured their time and maybe their sanity into getting this thing out the door. Long nights, tight deadlines, constant pressure. This was the reality of mid-90s game development. And they all contributed to a port that, despite its compromises, gave Jaguar owners bragging rights. For that brief moment, if you wanted to play the most faithful console Doom, you just had to play it on the Jaguar. But here's when the what-if questions start to sting. What if Atari had given the team more time? What if better development tools had been made available? Instead, we've ended up with history giving us a mixed bag. Fans and homebrew magicians of today have continued the innovation and created an expanded version of the original Jaguar game that even includes the original in-game music and restores some missing features, which proves that, with the right support, the Jaguar could have handled even more. But those are just glimpses into an alternate reality that I wish was a thing back in 1994 when I was pulling all-nighters in my parents' basement as a starving college student. So to truly understand the quality of the original Jaguar Doom, let's line up the different console versions and shine a flashlight into their dark corners, because each port tells its own little horror story. The Sega 32X version gets a lot of flack, but let's be fair, it was the very first console port of Doom. Boy does it show. The screen size was shrunk down into sort of a postage stamp window, with thick borders gobbling up real estate on the screen, like Pac-Man. Levels? Not all of them made the cut. You got 17 maps out of the 27 from the PC, so whole chunks of hell were missing. And forget about facing off against the Cyber Demon or Spider Mastermind. Those big, bad bosses were nowhere to be found. And as with the Jaguar version, the level maps themselves have been edited significantly to cut down on the amount of geometry and texture usage. Much of this is blamed on Sega's rush to get the game out in time for the 32X launch date, while other aspects are simply due to the fundamental hardware limitations of that console. Still, the 32X version ran at kind of a moderate clip, around 20 frames per second on average, and trust me, if you grew up as a kid on the Genesis in the early 90s, this was your ticket into Doom. Sure, the music was butchered into a bloody pulp by the 32X's sound hardware. It sounded like Doom was being played through a broken car stereo. I mean, check out this comment I saw about it.
No!
The internets have spoken. But overall, the core gameplay was still kinda there, but I'm sorry, the Sega 32X was just no match for the Jaguar on this one. Now, on to the Super Nintendo version. Bless its little 16-bit heart. This port used the much-hyped Super FX2 chip, an improvement over the original bolt-on chip that debuted in the Star Fox cartridge, and it pushed the Super Nintendo beyond all of its limits. And the results? The resolution was muddy. The frame rate fell into single digits at times, and the enemies would sometimes flicker like ghosts because the system just couldn't draw them all cleanly. Like with the other consoles, levels were missing left and right. You only got 22 of the PC maps, and they were simplified versions of that. Many rooms were stripped down or completely reworked just to make them fit into the cartridge's limitations. While the audio and music took a hit from the original PC version, the iconic Doom soundtrack was still there, and it didn't actually sound half bad, compared to the 32X version, but that's not saying much. While the Super Nintendo may actually be the worst overall console port at the time, in some weird way I still find it a little impressive that it was pulled off at all on a 16-bit console, so while it's a noble attempt, the experience itself is pretty crude, and if you ask me, it's headache-inducing and not recommended. As our final point of comparison to other contemporary console ports, let's check out how the 3DO version stacks up. So where do we start? Well, this one was pretty much a train wreck from day one. And the story goes that one of the programmers, Rebecca Heinemann, was basically handed the task and told, "You've got 10 weeks, good luck." And the results look exactly like what you'd expect from such a cruel deadline. The game ran in a tiny window in the middle of the screen, and even then it crawled along at something that looks like about 8 frames a second on a good day. But, to give credit where it's due, the 3DO version did have one saving grace: the soundtrack. Instead of MIDI, it featured fully re-recorded CD audio tracks that really shredded. So we've come full circle as we return to the Jaguar version, the surprising champion of the bunch. Yes, content was missing here too, but despite all of that, Jaguar port delivered where it mattered most: speed, smoothness, and playability. Up until the PlayStation version, which we'll talk about in a minute, the Jaguar version was a powerhouse that absolutely rocked and was a blast to play. It really captured the look and feel of the PC experience for the most part, and made Jag owners feel like they got their money's worth. And while the PlayStation version that came out a year after the Jaguar port is superior in every aspect, it was still based on the Jag Doom code. It also adds more content due to the additional storage capability of its CD format, including all of the levels not only from the original Doom, but from Doom 2, and it had all of the different monsters in it. unquestionably, Doom on the PlayStation ended up being the best console port of the mid-90s. The Sega Saturn had a port that wasn't released until 1997 that was also based on the PlayStation version, and sadly, it didn't run very well. But it had some extra secret hidden away and new enemies, which gave Saturn owners some extra fun of their own. So in the final analysis, Doom on the Atari Jaguar was the surprising champion and granddaddy of the bunch. But it's by no stretch of the imagination a perfect port, and here are some of my personal pet peeves. The most significant drawback is the absence of the original game's music, and while I'll admit it doesn't really detract too much from the experience, it is still noticeable. I remember the feeling of playing that heavy metal music from Alice in Chains on my CD player that sat next to the TV when I was playing this, which, believe me, more than makes up for it. Like the other ports, several levels are either missing or truncated, and two of the game's most iconic enemies, the Cyber Demon and Spider Mastermind, are absent, which, looking back on it now, I just find really hard to forgive. I mean, come on, this is supposed to be Doom. As mentioned earlier, the graphics look just a little too dark. I mean, seriously, I remember having to manually adjust the brightness on my old TV to make the game playable. Another very minor criticism is that the controller setup on the Jaguar prevented players from circle strafing. Sure, you could strafe from side to side, and the overall controls weren't bad at all, but I always wished that movement could have translated somehow from the more fluid keyboard and mouse controls on the PC. The Jag's controller did make good use of its number pad, which, when you slipped in the little overlay card, made it a snap to quickly alternate through the different weapons, without having to slow down the action by using a selection menu. Lastly, unlike the Wolfenstein 3D port, Jag Doom lacks multiple save slots and checkpoints, which means players have to replay long levels from the beginning if they die, adding to the old-school challenge, but also causing frustration at times. None of these are deal breakers, of course. I just wish a few common-sense, quality-of-life fixes could have been made before it was originally released. I mean, a guy can dream, right? So as we wrap things up, it's hard to argue that Doom on the Atari Jaguar isn't a solid and enjoyable port, especially for collectors and fans of the console. While it's not the exact same experience found on the PC, it's still a thrilling and very playable version of the game that remains one of the brightest points of light in the Jaguar's library. Now we can see why John Carmack himself preferred the Jaguar version. For a brief, shining point during 1994, Atari regained its bragging rights. If you wanted the best home version of Doom, you had to own their weird, complicated, and powerful console. And then, later, the Jaguar fizzled itself out, buried under groundbreaking technological advancements of the PlayStation and Nintendo 64, and their virtually limitless marketing budgets. Nevertheless, Jaguar Doom is a true success story that shows what could be done when developers pushed impossible hardware to its limits. And maybe that's why we still talk about it today. Not because it was perfect, but because it proved that even in Atari's twilight years, the company could still deliver a BFG shot of a gaming experience, even as it went down swinging, Alamo style.
Can't you remember anything?
I remembered the Alamo.
So next time you fire up Doom on the Jaguar, remember that behind every pixel, every demon, and every shotgun blast, there's a story of developers who fought through their own hell to bring hell onto your console. Thanks very much for watching. If you enjoyed this deep dive, please help me out and hit that like button. Tell me in the comments which version of Doom you played first, and whether you survived the Super Nintendo port. And if you're new here, welcome to the channel, and subscribe for more feel-good retro gaming content. Alright my friends, this is the Retro Gaming Boss signing out, reminding you to keep your games old school. Thanks for watching, and I'll see you on the next one. Go online right now and ask a simple question. What's the best version of the original Rayman? You'll get a war. PlayStation fans will brag about its massive sales. Saturn fans will boast about its 2D prowess. But then, a small, fiercely dedicated group will appear from the shadows, whispering one name, the Atari Jaguar. They talk about its more saturated colors, its gameplay, its purity. Are they just nostalgic fanboys clinging to a failed console? Or do they have a legitimate case for this underdog version being the definitive way to play this classic? We're not just going to review it, we're going to dive deep into why this version is so fascinating, how it stacks up against its more famous siblings on the PlayStation and Saturn, and settle the debate once and for all. Was the Jaguar version of Rayman actually the best? Join me and find out in this Retro Gaming Boss exploration of the phenomenal Rayman on the Atari Jaguar. Do you still remember the hype? I was there, flipping through the glossy pages of gaming magazines in 1993 when I saw the first cartoonish screenshots for a new game called Rayman. It was like nothing I'd ever seen before. The characters looked like they'd jumped straight out of a Disney animated film. The backgrounds were lush and alive, and it all promised a 2D platforming revolution. But this game had a crazy development story full of changes and delays along the way. It was initially destined for the Super Nintendo CD-ROM add-on, that mythical piece of hardware that never was. And when that project crumbled, it needed a new home, a powerful next-generation console that could actually bring these visions to life. And against all odds, it found one in the most unlikely of places, the Atari Jaguar. Now, let's be real. When you think of the Atari Jaguar, you don't typically think of beautiful, genre-defining platformers. You think of low-res polygons with the texture of a cheese grater. You think of that controller that looks like a loaf of bread. But for a brief shining moment in 1995, the Jaguar had a killer app. A genuine, no questions asked, system-selling masterpiece. This is the story of how Rayman didn't just come to the Jaguar, but how it defied every expectation and became one of the most beloved games on the system, known more for its potential than for its library. But before we dive into it, I'd like to invite you to subscribe to my YouTube channel, which is always here for a quick retro gaming break whenever you need it. I appreciate your support, since it's the only way that YouTube will highlight my videos. As we get into the comparison between the console versions, first, we have to set the stage. The year is 1995. The PlayStation is about to drop in North America and change everything. The Sega Saturn is already here, flexing its 2D muscle. And in the corner is the Atari Jaguar, screaming into the void that it's 64-bit. The problem was, it had very few games that actually backed up that claim. Then along comes Rayman. Developed by a then unknown French studio called Ubisoft, under the visionary Michel Ancel, this was the game that was supposed to be the Jaguar's savior, its killer app. And you know what? For a while, it really was. It was heavily advertised as a system exclusive, a reason to buy this weird, underpowered or overpowered console. Look, the Jaguar's specs are a conversation for another day. The point is, Rayman was a big deal for the Jaguar. But the story of how it got here is even more fascinating. This wasn't just a quick port. Michel Ancel had conceived Rayman as a teenager, and after being hired by Ubisoft, he started building a prototype on the Atari ST, spending a full 6 months just on the animation system. He initially pitched a game with a big giant trombone that the player would be inside of. The game's whimsical style was mixed with Ancel's own childhood memories of exploring rivers and climbing trees. He recruited illustrators and artists from animation studios, aiming for a staggering 60 Hz animation quality at a time when most games were using a measly 5 frames per second. This was an artistic ambition on a level we rarely saw. The project was greenlit in 1992, and the team was given immense artistic freedom. But the road was rocky. After the Atari ST, they pivoted to the Super NES CD-ROM, only for Nintendo to cancel the entire peripheral, effectively scrapping that version of the game. It was at this point, with the project in limbo, that Ubisoft made a huge bet. They allocated a massive 15 million francs, grew the team to 100 people, and they chose the Atari Jaguar as their primary target, believing it was the machine that could finally handle their grand vision. They first showed it at the 1994 Summer CES, promising a release by that December. Of course, it was delayed, as great things often are. It's wild to think that this game, which would later be a PlayStation launch title, was fundamentally built for and born on the Jaguar. Versions for the 32X and 3DO were even announced but ultimately canceled, making the Jaguar version even more historically significant. A quick personal story: I'll never forget the first time I saw it running. A friend of mine was over to check out my Jaguar, and we gathered around my old 14-inch CRT TV, surrounded by the usual clutter of soda cans and controller cables. We had been playing the early 3D of Cybermorph and the side-scroller shooter Trevor McFur, and we were frankly a little disappointed with this 64-bit future. But then I popped in Rayman. The screen lit up. The dream forest wasn't just a background, it was a living, breathing ecosystem. The subtle bobbing of the platforms, and the impossibly smooth animation of Rayman himself. Our minds were blown. It felt like we were watching a cartoon, but there we were, controlling it. In a sea of grim sci-fi aesthetics and clunky early polygon games, Rayman was a burst of pure, unadulterated joy. It was like stepping directly into an animated film, and for that afternoon, we weren't just playing a video game, we went inside of a work of art. But let's talk about what you're actually seeing on the screen, because it's nothing short of a technical marvel. The Jaguar was notoriously difficult to program for, with its multiple processors that had to be juggled like a circus act. Yet, Ubisoft managed to coax out of it a 2D visual presentation that is, to this day, timeless. We're not just talking about colorful sprites here, we're talking about impeccably fluid animation. Every movement Rayman makes, from his helicopter hairspin to his stretching punch, is buttery smooth. The backgrounds are dense, layered works of art. The dream forest feels alive, teeming with bizarre flora and fauna, all animated with this delightful, cartoony bounciness. The parallax scrolling, which is not always present, is smooth as silk, creating a real sense of depth. And here's the point my eagle-eyed commenters are sure to bring up: the colors. There's a warmth and vibrancy to the Jaguar version that feels different from the PlayStation and Saturn ports. If you look closely, the pink flowers in the Dream Forest are a prime example. This difference isn't just artistic license or how many different colors are on screen. The Jaguar itself used a different color format based on chroma and luma properties, rather than pure RGB like its competitors. This resulted in a distinct, often richer and more saturated color palette that makes the world of Rayman feel even more like a living cartoon. It's a subtle thing, but for those of us who stare at pixels all day, it's a fascinating technical distinction. Now, a common criticism of the Jaguar was its sound capabilities, especially with the game's audio limited to the cartridge format, and it's true. The CD-based versions of Rayman on the PlayStation and Saturn have a clear advantage. They boast a full, orchestral CD soundtrack. The Jaguar, by comparison, had to make do with synthesized music and mono sound. But here's the twist that many of you who have actually played it might already know. The Jaguar soundtrack has its own charm. It's more melodic, more cartoony, and it seems closer to the original creative intent before CD audio allowed for more cinematic grandeur. It's like comparing a basic Looney Tunes score to a blockbuster film soundtrack. Both are great in different ways, but they serve up a different feel. And let's not forget the biggest practical advantage of the cartridge format. You jump right in, no staring at a screen waiting for the data to stream from a CD. It's instant gratification. Score one for the Jag. And real quick, if you enjoy this content, I've put a link in the description below of a playlist of all of my other videos that you also might enjoy. So check it out and stick around for a while. But a beautiful shell means nothing if the game inside is a dud. So, how does it play? The core gameplay of Rayman is deceptively simple. It's a 2D platformer in the purest sense. You run, you jump, you punch. But the genius is in the progression. Rayman starts his journey hilariously underpowered. He can't even throw a punch. You have to find the fairies hidden throughout the world who bestow upon you new abilities like the power to attack, grab ledges, and eventually to temporarily fly. This Metroidvania-light approach is brilliant, encouraging you to backtrack to earlier levels with your new powers to find hidden electoons you couldn't reach before. It gives the world a sense of cohesion and discovery that many other platformers lacked. And then we have to talk about the elephant in the room, the difficulty. Oh, the difficulty. Rayman will lull you into a false sense of security with its cutesy visuals and charming music. The first world, the Dream Forest, is a pleasant stroll. But by the time you hit the second world, Bandland, the game pulls out a baseball bat named Punishment and proceeds to beat you senseless with it. This is one of the most brutally difficult platformers of the era. It's not just tough, it's cruel. It's filled with insta-death bottomless pits, precision platforming over beds of spikes, and sequences that demand pixel-perfect timing. And I'll be honest with you, despite playing this game on and off over the decades, I've only seen the ending the legitimate way a couple of times. It just somehow breaks me down every single time. And this is where one of the most fascinating comparisons come in. Among the hardcore community, there's a very passionate argument that the Jaguar version is actually the easiest of the three. Now, easier is a relative term here. We're still talking about a game that eats controllers for breakfast, but there's some truth to it. Many commenters have pointed out that the Jaguar version lacks some of the momentum-based speed increases found in the later versions. The overall gameplay does feel a tad slower, a bit more deliberate, which in a game that requires this level of precision can be a godsend. When you're trying to make a jump between two tiny platforms over a bottomless pit, a fraction of a second more reaction time can be the difference between success and rage quitting. So let's get into the nitty-gritty of the port comparison, because this is the meat of the debate. The PlayStation version is the one that most people remember. It has the CD audio, the full motion video intro, and it's sold like crazy. The Saturn version is a fantastic port as well, often considered to be the best of the CD versions, with some exclusive transitional scenes. But the Jaguar version holds its own in ways that are often overlooked. Beyond the color and gameplay differences, the Jaguar cartridge included a full, complete minigame, a breakout clone, that was missing from the other consoles and required a cheat code to access in the PC version. And if you remember the drama during service interruptions with online gaming services, and I'm looking at you, PlayStation Network, on the Jaguar you're playing it on a cartridge that will almost never stop working. And even back in the day, it was a relief popping that cartridge in the Jaguar, knowing there was no laser to fail or disc to scratch. There's a kind of beautiful permanence to it. Another memory is from a local electronics store that I used to stop at almost each day on the way home from my classes at university. They had a kiosk set up with a Jaguar running Rayman that was right next to a PlayStation running a demo of Ridge Racer. Of course, everyone was crowded around the PlayStation, oohing and awing at the impressive polygons. But I stood solo at the Jaguar kiosk, utterly transfixed. I remember controlling Rayman in Bandland, with its giant trumpets and living musical notes, and just being blown away by its sheer creativity. And yeah, while the PlayStation was showing me the future of racing games, the Jaguar was showing me what it was like to enter a living painting. That experience felt special, like I was in on a secret that the crowd around the flashy new console was completely missing. And in that moment, it wasn't about bits or blast processing, it was about a feeling of magic. And the Jaguar version still has it in spades. So, where does that leave us? The PlayStation version had the sales and mainstream recognition. The Saturn version had Sega's 2D prowess behind it. But the Jaguar version had soul. And that's not just nostalgia speaking. It's the underdog story. It's the version that proved this black box of confusion was capable of true artistry. It's the version that, despite the chunky controller and despite its mono sound, still delivers an unbelievably smooth gameplay experience. For Jaguar owners, this game was a badge of honor and a source of pride, to include in our collections. It was proof that our console wasn't a joke. It was a glimpse into an alternate reality where the Jaguar actually had the big-name software support it desperately needed. In the end, Rayman on the Jaguar is more than just a great game. It's a historical artifact. It's a testament to what passionate developers can achieve, even on the most challenging of hardware. It's a beautifully animated, brutally challenging, and technically impressive showcase that transcends its platform. While the debate over the best version may still rage on in internet forums forever, one thing is undeniable. Without the Atari Jaguar as its unlikely incubator, we might never have gotten Rayman at all. And for that alone, this quirky console deserves its moment in the spotlight with this one perfect and timeless gem. But what do you think? Was Rayman on the Jaguar really that good? Or do you wave the flag for the awesome PlayStation or Saturn versions? Let's get a proper, respectful debate going in the comments below. I'd love to hear your take. Alright my friends, this is the Retro Gaming Boss signing out. Thanks for watching, and I'll see you on the next one. You're sitting in a dimly lit room. The glow of a CRT monitor is the only light. The hum of a 486 CPU fan is a constant companion. With a click on the keyboard, you type the command. The screen flashes and that iconic pixelated eagle emblem appears. The digitized voice snarls. And you're in. This was the moment. For many of us, this was our first true step into a 3D world. It was revolutionary. But what if I told you that one of the most fascinating, technologically impressive, and frankly most playable versions of this landmark game wasn't on your PC? What if I told you it was on a console that most people wrote off as a joke? A console that, in this one specific instance, managed to pull off a genuine miracle. Today, we're not just talking about Wolfenstein 3D. We're unearthing a forgotten gem. We're taking a deeper dive into Wolfenstein 3D on the Atari Jaguar. This isn't just a review, it's an investigation. We're going to peel back the layers of this port, not just to see what's there, but to understand how it got there. We'll explore the Jaguar's notoriously complex architecture. We'll dissect the ingenious solutions the developers at id Software had to employ, and put this version side by side with the PC original to see where it shines and where it stumbles. For gaming history buffs, for Jaguar apologists, for anyone who loves a good underdog story, this is a crucial piece of the puzzle. This is the story of how a doomed console managed to do justice to one of the most important games ever made. So let's set the stage properly. The year is 1994. The Jaguar is on the market, Atari's great hope, the 64-bit warrior meant to slay Sega and Nintendo. But it's struggling. The library is thin, and developers are wary. Meanwhile, id Software's newly released Doom has set the PC world on fire. Porting this kind of complex, texture-mapped 3D game to a cartridge-based console seems like a pipe dream. The Super Nintendo version of Wolfenstein was a heavily compromised, stripped-down shadow of the original. And the Genesis version? It was sadly cancelled due to some, technical problems? Right. So when Atari announced the Jaguar port, most people expected another butcher job. Boy, were they wrong. What id and the developers created wasn't just a port. It was a clever and in some ways a superior reinterpretation of the classic. It's a testament to what the Jaguar could do when its potential was properly tapped. Before we get into the meat of the tech that powered this game, let's get into the game itself. How does it actually feel to play Wolfenstein 3D on the Jaguar? If you're coming from the PC version, the first thing you'll notice is that it's unmistakably Wolfenstein. In Wolfenstein 3D, you play as William B.J. Blazkowicz, an American spy during World War II. Deep behind enemy lines, blasting your way through hordes of Nazi scum. The core loop is intact. You navigate the maze-like levels. You shoot Nazi guards and dogs. You find keys, and you hunt for secrets. But the devil, and in this case the delight, is in the details. For example, the Jaguar version introduced the very same rocket launcher from Doom, and even added an all-new flamethrower to give you even more variety and fun when laying down the hate against the Nazi horde and the ginormous, freakish bosses. And of course, it includes the chain gun. Oh yeah, that chain gun. It also came with 4 difficulty levels. Each level completely changed the number of enemies and the amount of damage they caused, and even removed some items, replacing them with even more enemies. This provided a challenge for players of all skill levels and abilities. And then there were the differences in the content of the game itself. The Jaguar version was actually based on the Super Nintendo port, but it offered some additional content and had some level adjustments. But it was still grounded in the same core gameplay experience that made the original so iconic. However, the cost of the additional content meant smaller level map and fewer levels than were found in the PC version. The levels themselves were redesigned to be more compact. They feel less sprawling and maze-like than the PC originals, which some purists might see as a negative, though arguably it makes for a more focused, action-packed experience. Finally, the total number of enemies per room seems to have been slightly toned down, likely to maintain that solid frame rate, so the game difficulty feels a bit less overwhelming at times. Now, to understand why the Jaguar port of Wolfenstein 3D is such an achievement, we first have to grapple with the beast itself, the Jaguar's hardware. You've heard the term 64-bit thrown around in its marketing, and we'll get into some of the semantics of that debate in another video. But the real story is the Jaguar's unique and, frankly, bizarre multi-processor architecture. Forget a single powerful CPU. The Jaguar was a bag of chips. Not those. Those. And a committee of processors, so getting them to work in harmony was the fundamental challenge for any developer. At its heart, you had 2 key 32-bit RISC processors, the Tom chip, which handled graphics, and the Jerry chip, which was responsible for sound. But alongside these were 3 other processors, including a Motorola 68000 CPU, which was ironically intended as a simple systems manager, but often ended up doing the heavy lifting because it was familiar to developers. This wasn't a simple pipeline. It was a 5-lane highway with no lane markings or guardrails. The key to unlocking the Jaguar's power was parallel processing, keeping all of these chips fed with data and working simultaneously. Most developers who were used to simpler architectures never figured it out. They'd lean on the old 68K, and the game would run poorly and look like a 16-bit version. But if you could master the dance, if you could get Tom, Jerry, plus the Blitzer and object processor all working together in concert, you could achieve things that should have been impossible for a cartridge-based system in 1994. So how did id Software wrestle with this hardware? The port was actually handled by a few key figures, including id's resident wizard, John Carmack, who provided the core engine. As rumor has it, he coded the entire game engine over the course of a weekend, as sort of a tech demonstrator for the upcoming Doom engine that id would use for the excellent port for the Jaguar. And by the way, if you're interested to see the story about the Jag's Doom port, then you can check out my other video about that. I'll leave a link in the description so you can take a look. id's approach was a masterclass in optimization. They bypassed the sluggish 68K almost entirely, writing the core game logic directly for the custom RISC processors. They used the Jaguar's GPU for the game's core gameplay loop and enemy AI. But the real magic, the texture-mapped 3D graphics, was handed off from the Tom chip to the system's object processor. The Jaguar's object processor was a tile-based renderer, which is a very different way of drawing a screen compared to the PC's VGA mode. Instead of directly manipulating pixels in a frame buffer, you created a list of objects, sprites, textures, etc., and their positions, and the hardware assembles a screen on the fly. This is incredibly efficient for 2D games, but for a 3D game like Wolfenstein, it was unorthodox. id Software had to translate Carmack's raycasting engine into a form that the object processor could understand. They essentially turned each vertical strip of the wall texture into an object that the Jaguar could place on the screen. It was a brilliant, if convoluted, workaround that leveraged the Jaguar's specific strengths to achieve a result that, as we'll see, was remarkably close to the PC original and in some ways surpassed it. Beyond the hype and the marketing fluff, the development was a battle against technical challenges. The Jaguar had very fast video RAM, but a limited bus for getting data in and out. This meant careful management of assets. There was no room for the full, sprawling levels of the PC version. The Jaguar cartridges had limited space, so the levels had to be redesigned, made more compact. But for every compromise, there was an ingenious solution. The developers didn't just cut and paste, they re-engineered the game for a completely different platform, and in doing so, they created something unique. In a side-by-side comparison with the original PC version, the differences are subtle but significant. Let's start with the visuals. The Jaguar's graphics were in a much higher resolution and had more detail than its DOS counterpart. The Atari Jaguar port had new textures and enemy sprites. The graphics for walls, enemies, and other objects don't become blocky or chunky at close range, a problem that the Super Nintendo and DOS version suffered from. The original Wolfenstein 3D, released in 1992, ran at a screen resolution of 320 by 200 pixels. This was fairly typical for PC games at that era, especially given the hardware limitations of the time. The DOS version of the game also ran in a 256 color palette. While the resolution may seem low by today's standards, it was actually somewhat impressive for the time, providing a smooth, albeit pixelated, experience for gamers. The game's performance was heavily optimized to run on the hardware available back then, including early graphics cards like the VGA and EGA variety. Wolfenstein 3D used a technique called raycasting to create its pseudo-3D environments. Raycasting is a simplified form of 3D rendering where the game engine traces rays from the player's viewpoint and projects them onto a 2D plane to simulate depth. The game treats the environments as a series of walls and rooms. By casting rays at various angles, it calculates the distance to the wall and renders them at varying heights on the screen. This approach was computationally less intensive than full 3D rendering, which allowed the game to run smoothly on the hardware available in 1992. However, this also meant that the game's environments were limited to a series of rooms and corridors, without true 3D object handling or dynamic lighting. When Wolfenstein 3D was ported to the Atari Jaguar, the console's more advanced hardware allowed the raycasting technique to be implemented more effectively. This resulted in clearer textures and more consistent visuals. The improved processing power also enabled faster overall rendering and reduced aliasing, resulting in a more polished and visually appealing experience. In fact, the Jaguar port of Wolfenstein 3D ran the game at 640 by 480 pixels in high-resolution mode, using the Jaguar's native capabilities. This provided a much better visual presentation than the original. The color palette is also slightly different. The Jaguar version has a somewhat more muted and darker color palette compared to the vibrant, almost cartoonish colors of the PC VGA original. In this port, the enemy and boss sprites also used flipped images of themselves while walking, which increased the frames in their movement animation from just 2 to 4. The enemies in the Jaguar version also have a distinct mirage effect when hit, for easy visual confirmation when you are landing shots. And here's maybe the most surprising strength of the Jaguar version, the frame rate. With very few exceptions, the Jaguar version is remarkably smooth. It often feels more consistent than the PC version running on mid-tier 486 machines at the time, which could slow down a bit when there were multiple enemies on screen. The Jaguar's custom hardware, once properly leveraged, delivered a surprisingly solid and responsive experience. And the texture mapping is where the technical ingenuity really shows. The core raycasting technique is the same, but the Jaguar's method of drawing those vertical strips results in a very clean image with less of the shearing or flickering that could sometimes be seen on the PC. The walls are solid, the perspective is correct, and the sense of movement is excellent. It's a testament to the efficiency of that object processor workaround. They got the 3D effect to work, and work well. on hardware that was never designed for it in a way that the PC's VGA card was. Another subtle but brilliant addition was the dynamic lighting when you fired your weapon. On the PC, the screen would flash white when you shot, a simple effect. On the Jaguar, when you fired your gun, the entire corridor in front of you would be illuminated by the muzzle flash, casting dynamic light onto the walls for a split second. This was a tiny graphical flourish, but it added a huge amount of atmosphere and feedback that the PC version lacked. It showed a level of polish and creative thought that went beyond a simple port. Now let's talk about the audio. Because this is an area where the Jaguar version doesn't just compete, it wins. The PC version used the PC speaker or a Sound Blaster card for its iconic, gravelly, digitized speech and soundtrack. The Jaguar, however, was equipped with the Jerry chip, which included a powerful custom wavetable synthesizer. The result? The sound effects in the Jaguar version are sharper and ring more true. The guard shouts of Achtung have more presence and less distortion. The weapon sounds, from the popping of the pistol to the satisfying chatter of the machine gun, are punchier. And the music, while the same composition, is delivered with a richer and fuller tone. The Jerry chip was a beast of a DSP, and Wolfenstein 3D is one of the few games that used it to its full potential, creating a genuinely more immersive and atmospheric audio experience that heightened the tension considerably. So we've established that the port is technically impressive, but how about the controls? The Jaguar version was built from the ground up for its proprietary controller. Now, the Jaguar gamepad is an acquired taste, with its number pad and awkward ergonomics. However, the control mapping for Wolfenstein was brilliantly conceived. You use the D-pads for movement and the main buttons for firing, opening, running, and, wait for it, strafing, a revolution for console players. The numeric keypad buttons were used for quick saving, viewing the auto map, and toggling the in-game music. Overall, it was a comprehensive and surprisingly fluid control scheme that made the game far more accessible and immediately playable for anyone without a keyboard and mouse setup. It was a blueprint for how to bring an FPS to a console. To truly appreciate the Jaguar port's place in history, it's essential to contrast it not just with the PC original, but with the Super Nintendo version. The difference isn't just technical, it's philosophical, and it stems from one of the most famous controversies in gaming history. Nintendo of America, with its strict family-friendly content policies at the time, demanded significant changes to their version. All religious iconography, specifically swastikas and any references to Hitler, had to be removed. The enemies were changed from Nazis to a fictional, generic, evil regime, and the boss enemy Hitler was transformed into a monstrosity called the Stadtmeister. For John Carmack and id Software, this was an unacceptable compromise of their creative vision. It sanitized the game's very identity in historical, albeit exaggerated, context. This experience left a sour taste and directly motivated Carmack to seek a console partner that would allow them to release the game intact. This partner was Atari. As a result, the Jaguar version became the definitive console port by default, featuring all the original enemy sprites, swastikas, and the unaltered final boss, the intimidating Mecha Hitler. This wasn't just a business decision. For Carmack, it was a matter of principle, and it channeled his development focus towards ensuring the Jaguar received a port that was not only technically competent, but also artistically complete. But the differences go far deeper than sprite edits. From a technical standpoint, comparing the Jaguar and Super Nintendo version is like comparing a sports car to a go-kart. The Super Nintendo, while a 2D powerhouse, was architecturally ill-suited for texture-mapped 3D games like Wolfenstein. The port, developed by Imagineer, was a marvel of software engineering in its own right, but it was a fundamentally compromised experience. It ran at a significantly lower resolution, making everything appear chunkier and more blurred. The frame rate was notoriously sluggish, often dipping into single digits during any action, which made responsive gameplay a challenge. And to achieve even this, the developers had to simplify the level geometry, remove many of the decorative objects like lights and barrels, and dramatically reduce the number of enemies on screen. The iconic digitized speech was completely stripped out to the Super Nintendo's sound chip limitations and were replaced by more rudimentary sound effects. The Jaguar version, with its smooth frame rate, full audio suite, and intact visual identity, wasn't just a better port. It was in an entirely different league. It stood as a testament to what was possible on the more capable, if less commercially successful hardware, and as a direct result of Carmack's refusal to let his game be censored. So what's the legacy of Wolfenstein 3D on the Jaguar? In the grand commercial sense, it was the drop in the ocean. It didn't save the Jaguar, and it was quickly overshadowed by the exceptional Jaguar port of Doom, and also the rise of the Nintendo 64 and the ultimate domination of the PlayStation. But for retro enthusiasts and developers today, it remains profoundly relevant. This port is a case study in skilled, low-level optimization. It's a lesson in how to understand a piece of hardware's fundamental architecture and then bend it to your will, rather than forcing a square peg into a round hole. For modern developers working with constrained mobile hardware or unique console architectures, the principles on display here, such as parallel processing, leveraging specialized hardware, smart asset management, are as applicable today as they were in 1994. It shows that with enough talent and ingenuity, you can create something exceptional on supposedly inferior hardware, and the enduring community support for this version is a testament to its quality. Among Jaguar fans, it's consistently ranked as one of the system's must-own titles. Emulator developers have spent years reverse engineering its tricks to get it to run accurately. Online forums are filled with players sharing their memories and appreciating the technical craft on display. It's earned its respect the hard way, through pure performance. When we reevaluate the Atari Jaguar's place in gaming history, we have to look beyond its commercial failure and its flawed library. We have to look at its peaks, at the moments where its potential was truly realized. Wolfenstein 3D on the Jaguar is one of those peaks. It's a clear lens through which we can see what the Jaguar was capable of. It wasn't a 64-bit monster that could render the PlayStation obsolete, but it was a powerful, unique, and deeply complex machine that, in the right hands, could perform minor miracles. Wolfenstein 3D on the Jaguar is more than a port. It's a piece of digital archaeology. It's a reminder of a different path used in console architecture during the early days of 3D console gaming. It's a love letter to one of gaming's foundational titles, built by developers who respected both the source material and the platform they were working on. So the next time you think of the Atari Jaguar, don't just think of the jokes or the failure. Think of that dark room, the glow of the CRT, the smooth movement through the castle corridor, and the satisfying staccato blast spraying down the room with your chain gun. To me, Wolfenstein 3D is a forgotten gem, just waiting to be rediscovered and appreciated for the technical marvel that it truly is. Alright my friends, this is the Retro Gaming Boss signing out. Thanks for watching, and I'll see you on the next one.
Eine kleine Amerikaner.
Today we're taking a look back at a forgotten relic of the 16-bit and 64-bit era, Dragon, the Bruce Lee story, specifically the Atari Jaguar version. Yes, that's right, and it's arguably the best version on any console of this martial arts movie tie-in game. But how does it stack up against the Sega Genesis and Super Nintendo versions? And how does the game capture the legacy of the martial arts legend himself? Join me in this Retro Gaming Boss review as we get into all the details. Bruce Lee himself was far more than just an action star. He was a philosopher, a filmmaker, and the founder of a martial arts style called Jeet Kune Do, which means the way of the intercepting fist. His impact on cinema, martial arts, and pop culture is immeasurable. So when a game adaptation came out, expectations were high, and the results were, well, kind of mixed. The game was released in 1994 on multiple platforms, including the Sega Genesis, Super Nintendo, and later, the Atari Jaguar. Published by Virgin Interactive Entertainment, it's a 2D side-scrolling beat-em-up, which loosely follows the events of the film. Following scenes and events of the movie, players take control of Bruce Lee across several stages that take place in different time periods in his life, in pivotal fights against his adversaries. In the story mode, players have 3 continues, and if defeated, they're thrown into a fight for their life with the Demon Warrior to continue, which is the personification of Bruce's fear that takes the form of an armored samurai, which is nearly invincible. As with any fighting game, mastering the controls is key, and fortunately in Dragon, they're not particularly hard. It also features a chi meter, a gameplay mechanic that fills up to reflect Bruce's spiritual power. As you defeat more enemies, your chi increases. It unleashes special moves on your opponents, including the use of nunchucks. That's right, fricking nunchucks. And I'm not talking about Teenage Mutant Ninja Turtles. I'm talking about the Kung Fu legend himself, showing the world how it's really done. One of the things I like most about this game is how it gets the little details right, even down to the notorious Bruce Lee Ultra Stomp from the film Enter the Dragon. And that's almost like a game's finishing move, but it isn't really. No, this isn't Mortal Kombat, and there's no Hadouken fireballs being thrown around here. The combat system in this game is based more on authentic martial arts. And remember, even though Mortal Kombat came out in 1993, a year before this game, the character of Liu Kang is a throwback based on Bruce Lee and his Jeet Kune Do style of fighting. And what this game does best is put you right in the middle of the iconic scenes from the different Bruce Lee movies, not the least of which is the final fight in Enter the Dragon, with that guy with the knives for a hand. No, not that guy. Yeah, that guy. And look at that case full of all of his different hands. Is that a bear claw? Jeez. And when that movie's theme music kicks in, oh man, that's when the true magic happens.
You have offended my family, and you have offended the Shaolin Temple.
But something I thought was kind of a strange juxtaposition was in the level where you fight in the college gymnasium. Your opponent isn't the meathead jock from the movie, in which this scene is based, but instead is that cool cat Williams from the other film, Enter the Dragon. Maybe Williams was just added as a recognizable character into the game, even though he wasn't in the film on which this game is based. Now I'm getting confused. Anyway, I always liked the Williams character, so when I first saw him in this level, I was really happy to see this cameo.
Don't waste my time.
Oh, how so?
I'll be too busy looking good.
Now, here's where things get interesting. As mentioned earlier, the Jaguar version came out in 1994, a bit later than the other console ports of the game. Naturally, it took advantage of the Jag's more powerful hardware. So we've just got to do a side-by-side comparison, and we'll do this by seeing how the graphics, sound, and gameplay stack up between the different versions. But let's exclude the Sega Master System and Game Gear versions due to their obvious differences. In the graphics department, the Jaguar version features sharper sprites, significantly more detailed backgrounds, and smoother animations than the Genesis and Super Nintendo. It's easily the best looking version. The character model for Bruce is more defined, and the stages are packed with additional, recognizable details from the original films, such as the Ice House level in The Big Boss Man, and Han's Lair in Enter the Dragon. I mean, just look at the increased detail seen in the first and last levels in a side-by-side comparison against the Genesis version, and you'll immediately notice how much better the graphics are in the Jaguar. But with the Jag's vast color palette, better parallax scrolling, and overall increased detail in this version, it's much more true to the movie. Next up is sound, which is also a clear win for the Jaguar. The music and sound effects are fuller, with cleaner audio sampling and deeper bass. Not surprisingly, the Genesis version suffers from tinny audio, and while the Super Nintendo has great sound effects, its music has a noticeable and slightly muddy sounding compression. The Jaguar's CD quality audio is noticeably better, assuming that you're playing on a TV with decent speakers or are using headphones. The Jaguar also runs the game more smoothly. It has less slowdown during fights than its 16-bit cousins, which makes the difference in such a fast-paced action game. It even features an insane turbo mode, which ramps up the movement speed to insane if you want to take the experience to the next level. But the controls aren't perfect. The Jaguar's unique controller isn't exactly the greatest for fighting games, and the game's design has a repetitive combat system with a limited set of moves and not the greatest hit detection. But these issues are actually present across all versions, not only on the Jaguar. One final criticism specific to the Jaguar version is the missing story cutscenes that are seen in the Super Nintendo version, and heck, even the Genesis version included them as well. I'm not sure why these were left out of the Jaguar cartridge, which could have really shown off the photorealistic 2D capabilities of the system. Maybe someday we'll get lucky and get to see them added back into a homebrew version. So all things considered, there's not really much difference in gameplay between the ports on the different consoles. But I'm still going to go with the Jag version based on what I feel is a slight edge in smoothness throughout, thanks to its more powerful 2D capabilities. So now that we've touched on the game itself, let's jump into a few interesting bits of trivia. First is that Dream Demon. It's a symbolic figure added in the film to represent Bruce Lee's fear of passing down a family curse, and it made for an intense final boss fight in the game. Seeing Bruce's tombstone in this level is a haunting foreshadowing of the star's untimely demise in real life. Interestingly, the game supports 2-player co-op mode versus the CPU, allowing you and a friend to play as spiritual projections of Bruce, which is kind of weird, but also kind of awesome.
I know Kung Fu. Show me.
This 3-player mode was inspired by Bruce's philosophy of unifying the 3 aspects of life, namely the mind, the body, and the spirit. So a neat thematic tie-in, even though it's never really explained in the game. And sadly, despite being a very solid and fun game on the Jaguar, Dragon wasn't much of a commercial success. But over the years, it's become a cult favorite for both martial arts fans and retro game collectors, and proud Jaguar owners, of course. So, is Dragon, the Bruce Lee story on the Jaguar, a hidden gem? Kind of. It's not the greatest game by modern standards, but it is the definitive version of this particular title on any console, and I'll die on this hill defending that. Better graphics, better sound, and a really enjoyable example of 1990s movie tie-in games. It's also a fascinating tribute to one of the most influential martial artists of all time. Bruce Lee's impact still resonates today, and while this game may not do full justice to his legacy, it's a loving, if imperfect, homage to a great man and an incredible life. So if you enjoyed this look back at retro gaming history, please hit that like button for me and subscribe. Don't forget to hit that bell icon for more retrospectives from gaming's past. And be sure to tell me in the comments what's your favorite Bruce Lee moment in films or this game. Alright my friends, this is the Retro Gaming Boss signing out, reminding you to keep your games old school and to be like water. Thanks for watching, and I'll see you on the next one.